many characters in video games as well as anime. You can hear him as Anarchy in Batman, Captain Levi in Attack on Titan. Let's hear it for Lord Matthew Mercer.
It's a pleasure to be here among such esteemed gentlemen.
Oh, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy.
Hello everyone! Super excited to be here. I just flew in, so I'm in that kind of like, woo state, and I'll be there for a while, so the panels will be really fun in the next few hours.
I'm sure that's why you like that.
You've done a ton of anime, but you've also done a ton of video games, and I know that there's a lot of differences between doing voice acting for video games versus anime, so I guess if you could go into sort of the differences between the two experiences.
Yeah, certainly. Well, for instance, anime dubbing is one of those processes where you have all the animation already complete for you. Unlike pre-lay animation, which is fun too. Pre-lay cartoons where you get to do like a group record most of the time, and you can basically drive the performance at whatever pace and style you like. Very freeing. Anime dubbing is very technical. It's very meticulous, which I think is a fun challenge personally. I think you'll see a lot of really strong actors that began and trained in anime will then move into other forms of animation and do amazingly because they essentially trained with weights on and then were released and came out stronger, Goku style. Where pre-lay or a lot of other forms of recording, you just get to drive whatever performance you want. In anime, you have to fit it into this tiny little box. You have like this small little time period, and it has to start when it starts and end when it ends, and the lip flaps have to match what's there, and the big vowels have to hit with the big mouth movements or it comes across awkward. So you have to do all that while still keeping it honest, still keeping it grounded in a believable performance, and for you to still be invested in the moment. So it's kind of acting multitasking. You're still putting yourself there. You're still going through the emotions. You're still, living as the character in that moment, but also this heightened level of being aware of I have to stop at this point and put a pause here, and it's a very much a collaboration between you, the director, and the engineer.
Okay.
Video games, for the most part, unless it's like an imported game, like a lot of Japanese RPGs, will have moments that are dubbed like anime, or cutscenes where you are very specific there. And then if it's a Japanese game, sometimes they have you loosely match timing. So it's not quite as, you can only fit it into this small space. It's more like you can fit it into like this kind of small space, Get it within a half a second of the length of time of this pre-existing Japanese file, listen to it, and then try and match the length. Most video games don't have that. You can control the performance however you want, and you and the director work together just to give a good read. However, in video games, it's a lot more in a much shorter period of time. You just have long scripts with sometimes no context or very little context that kind of just jump around. And so that's more like an intense, crack your neck and, all right, let's do this kind of a session, and you just kind of have to barrel through. Few sessions, if you're lucky enough, you get the chance to work with other actors, and mocap projects are great because those are more on camera style. You do full scene blocks, and it's a lot of repetition of those scenes until they get the right coverage they want. And of course, you get to work with other actors, which has a really great energy dynamic. But video games, usually it's just you solo in the booth, cranking through lines, playing off the director, and creating out of a vacuum, which is always fun.
So was voice acting something that you just knew ever since you were a kid you wanted to do, or how did you really become interested in it and lead to wanting to pursue it in the future?
It's something I was always fascinated with. It was never something I thought that I could really do. When I was very young, I grew up with a bad stutter. And so I went through a lot of years of speech therapy, and that was one point where I was like, oh, I'm afraid the stutter will creep back up again. And then as I got older, I got into art and illustration, and of course, video games and cartoons, because I'm a huge nerd. So it's something I was always fascinated with, but never thought it was something I could actually get into, or I had an option to pursue. And as I got into theater and performance arts and stage, I got a little more comfortable and a little more confident, and began to find that I really was drawn towards the performance arts more than any other form of self-expression. And then I had the opportunity to do some background voices in an anime back in 2000, 2001. Through some strange coincidence, and my dad being an audio engineer at a post house who met a guy who's also a musician. They jammed together and found out he directed anime. It was long, weird, silly thing. Anyway, I had the opportunity to do an hour of background voices, like, hey you, or you know, guys dying in the background. I was like, this is the coolest thing in the world. Huh. I kind of like this. And they called me in to do background voices every like 6 months or every year. Very spotty, little things here and there, just enough to kind of whet my appetite. And then about mid-2000s, I started to book more work with them and began actually getting more character roles and working on bigger video game projects as well as some anime. And I was like, oh, I'm still young and don't have the responsibilities of like a family and a mortgage and all these things that make it harder to take really big risky maneuvers in your life. Let me try for it. So I saved up a little bit of money, quit my day job, and got a really tiny studio apartment in North Hollywood. Lived off ramen for a while, and just networked and trained and did classes, workshops, got out there and pushed really hard. And it was a very creative lifestyle for a while. I call it creative lifestyle. But after a while, I started to actually get some good traction, got a good agent, and it just kind of built from there. So that was my journey.
Cool. So I'm actually working on a book on cosplay due out later this year.
Oh,
now,
very cool.
You've done a number of characters that are very popular cosplay subjects. So I'm just curious, as a voice actor, sort of an industry person, what was your initial reaction the first time someone dressed up as Prom or Leon Kennedy came up to you and was like, oh, like, I'm such a huge fan. Like, what is that like?
Well, it's, for one thing, it's very humbling and impressive. When a character that you're that attached to, that you've been through the process within a project to record, and you have that kind of personal investment in, and somebody else took a lot of time and money and energy to recreate that and essentially embody that character, you can't help but have an immediate kinship. So you're like, oh, you like them too. You know, it's a connection point you can't ignore, and it's very flattering, especially if they bring it to show you, because then it's almost like you feel like the papa, and then they're like, look what I made, and it's like, that's amazing, it's so cool. And this is a funny note, I don't know if you're aware, but before I ever did any of this professionally, I've been going to cons since '97 as just a con goer. Like I said, huge nerd. I was pretty involved in the cosplay community in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I was one of the, it was like forum member number 103 on cosplay.com. It was very tiny. And yeah, I mean, I made quite a few costumes myself back in the early 2000s. So cosplay was a hobby that I was heavily invested in for a number of years.
Have you ever considered cosplaying one of the characters that you voiced?
I've thought about it. A little part of me was like, is that weird? Is that a little too like, is that like almost just...
A little too meta?
Kinda. I don't know. It's one of those things where if a costume were provided, I would do it right now. And the reason I don't do it anymore, because I love the hobby. And most of my best friends to this day, I met through the cosplay community. It was a wonderful time in my life. But when pursuing this career, it's a very expensive and time-consuming hobby, and I had to focus on my career. So that's kind of when I let it go, was to pursue this. And I don't have time anymore to do that. Mm-hmm. Plus the bar is so high now. People do such amazing work. I'm like, I was just with a heat gun and some cincher plastic. You got what's this weird scopy armor stuff? It's amazing. So if I'm at the point now when I follow a few fans, I'm like, if you make a costume and bring it to a con, I will wear the crap out of that. But I don't have time to make anything myself, unfortunately. Halloween's like my one jam a year where I'll go all out. So
awesome.
But I love it. I personally do.
So are there any other, parts of the entertainment field that you would want to be a part of? Maybe like behind the scenes production, on-screen acting? Did you ever want to pursue areas like that?
It's one of those things where, especially as a you call it, creative, or as a person who lives in that industry, you kind of have to pursue everything, because you never know what's going to bite, and you never know how long your current burst of work will last. Feast and famine is definitively the term used when it comes to being a person who makes their living creatively. I've done a good amount of on-camera work. I've done a lot of web series. I've shot 3 features last year, and we have 2 more coming up shooting this next year. But on-camera stuff isn't something I really actively pursue, just because voiceover is where my heart lies. It's where, to me, that's the most fulfilling. It's where my background is. It's what I love. I'm a hardcore gamer and cartoon aficionado, so that's where I live. But on-camera stuff is a lot of fun too, and it's an interesting experience, and I'm getting dragged into it more and more, so I'm just kind of keeping that balance. Production standpoint, I've been directing and producing web projects for a number of years. I had a web series in 2009 I did called There Will Be Brawl. That was a live-action film noir kind of HBO crime drama version of the Smash Brothers Nintendo universe. And I also directed 3 shorts a couple years ago called School of Thrones. That was kind of like a parody of Game of Thrones, but in like a John Hughes 80s high school film type way. And we have a musical that we kickstarted last year called Muzzled that we're in post on right now that should be launching in the summer. So I do some production work, and I enjoy elements of it, but every aspect is its own time-consuming structure, and which was much easier to do when I was just fledgling in my career. I'm at a point right now, for as long as it lasts, that I'm busy enough doing voiceover work primarily that I can't focus a lot on other projects right now, which is both frustrating and also a blessing. But as soon as that work begins to, wane for a bit, and I'm sure it will any time now, then I'm just going to jump back on that production train to stay busy, because I'm one of those people that needs to always be busy.
So you play Captain Levi in Attack on Titans, which is a very popular anime.
Yeah.
So when you auditioned for it, did you know about the big fandom? Were you intimidated at all? And who else did you audition for, if anyone else?
Okay. I was not aware when I first auditioned for it. I had a feeling, because the Anime Expo, before the auditions came through, I kept seeing everyone dressed up in this uniform. Like, what is this uniform? It's like everyone. This is crazy. And maybe in Japan, only the first 6 or so episodes had launched at that time, so it was still fresh from a Japan standpoint. People were already all over it. And I was like, what is this show?